Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Mandy. Mandy,
We are
What's the name of that restaurant again? My wife and I are going to come try it.
good. The Bramwell Corner Shop.
The corner stop.
It's yeah. It's in Bourbon, West Virginia, right on the corner. But Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday we close at 4. Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 8.
Okay, maybe probably knowing our crazy schedule will probably be a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday.
I don't know nothing about no crazy schedule. I'm on Zoom serving tables. I got you.
All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. We have it seemed like when it comes to the confessions, the past three classes we spent has definitely laid the groundwork in terms of theme. Today, of course, we're kind of putting a bow on all of that. Like what answers does Augustine finally come up with about questions like the natural law, the problem of good and evil, um, sin is disordered longing for God. Right? These are all things that he sort of he puts those things out there in those early chapters, but he certainly resolves them here in the conclusion up through the ninth book. The eighth book is when you see the conversion, which is one of the most powerful passages in medieval literature. But the ninth chapter is, of course, his loss. I wanted to also give you the ninth chapter because it's about the loss of his mother, Saint Monica. And I wanted to give you that chat as well because I wanted to kind of bring it back full circle to talk about our discussion of grief that we had the other day. So, like, how does the way Augustine grieves his mother different from the way that he grieves his friend all the way back in book 4? Right? It's a um, how does he process that and not get into a dark spiral of depression again? So this is all bringing it full circle. So before we get into the weeds, I just wanted to give some quick updates. I'm almost done with my glut freshman comp papers, so you guys will be next up for your ethics paper ones. Okay, so you'll probably get those back sometime next week. Um, Starting next week, we're gonna on Monday we're gonna spend a day talking about Islam. Islam. I'm gonna see if I can get our resident Arabic instructor to come and be a guest lecturer that day because it's probably better to come from her than me. Okay. Um, I'm going to check with her. If for some reason she can't, I'll teach it and I'll make it work. But I think it'll be better if she does it. Okay. So I'm going to invite her and see if she can join us. Starting next Wednesday, we're going to start getting into the modern philosophers, the modern ethical thinkers. So we're going to be moving into the Renaissance period. I'm definitely going to be surveying, like, we've spent a lot of time and depth with Aristotle and Augustine. Um, we unfortunately we probably won't go into as much depth with the modern thinkers. Part of that's because when it comes to philosophy, I'm a bit of a medievalist. Okay, but we'll be talking about a lot of thinkers in the next couple of weeks. Machiavelli, Kant, Nietzsche, the utilitarians. So we're going to spend a couple of weeks on that, and then we're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about medical ethics to close out the class. So that's next 2+ weeks. The modern thinkers. So you think, how's a guy from 1500 modern now compared to the stuff we have been reading that's modern? Um, So over the next couple of weeks will be really foundational, because a lot of these concepts we'll discuss certainly permeate modern ethics. People like the utilitarians, they've kind of got their hand all over ethics, especially medical ethics. The consequentialists. Well, all this stuff over the next couple of weeks, really important stuff. But unfortunately, we'll mostly cover it in passing and won't go as in depth as we have with Aristotle and Augustine. If I had more time, I would go more in depth with that other stuff. But alas, it's a 15-week syllabus, and then you lose 2 weeks from snow cancellations, and you lose a little something. So let's go ahead and get to it then. Let's see where to start. So to give you guys kind of a sketch of how this plays out, Book 6 was called Secular Ambitions and Conflicts. This is where he talked about that gladiator thing that I mentioned the other day, right? Lust comes from violence as well as physical lust. But in this chapter, it's named appropriately. It's about secular ambitions, secular conflicts, things in the world that keep him really from finding the divine truth, from finding God. That's kind of the major theme of that chapter. He talks about he finds him another mistress at this point in his life, right? How he's got a whole line of them, it seems. But he talks about all these different things that kind of keep his mind occupied from things that it shouldn't be. Chapter 7. This one, I'm sure that when you guys were reading this was probably the hardest chapter of the whole thing to read, because he goes into a lot of complex stuff. The whole thing that he's trying to resolve in chapter 7. If you remember, the Manichaeans, the Manichaeans was the religion that he was tempted by, right? And to kind of go back to that a little bit, the Manichaeans believed that there was really two divine beings, one that was represented good and one that represented evil. And both of them were kind of 50-50 powerful with one another. I guess you could probably say the good is 50.1 and the evil is 49.9, because eventually the good will overcome the evil at the end of time. There's this whole duality between good and evil. What he's after in Book 7, he's trying to resolve how this all works. He's obsessed with the idea that he can't imagine God, an infinite God. That's something that he is having a hard time imagining. He thinks that God has to be bound by some type of material body of some sort. That's what the Manichaeans taught. So a lot of what he's trying to resolve in that section is trying to see the errors of the Manichaean way of thinking. And he kind of systematically goes through that and discusses why we can't really conceptualize God or God within a material body. Like if we think about Zeus, go back to Greek mythology, right? Think about Zeus or Poseidon or Athena or whatever. They all seem limited and finite in some respect because they take a body, right? How could God, the Trinity, take a body? Well, Jesus Christ took a body, right? Christ made flesh. That was part of the whole divine plan. But God as the Trinity goes beyond the mere limitations of the body. So this is the hardest thing that he has to resolve within himself, to accept the Catholic faith in this situation, right? Because you can't have this understanding that God is limited in some way and have a Christian conception of God. So that's the whole thing that he is after in book 7. And we're going to look at some passages to see how he resolves some of this. But book 8 is the big one. And this is where he talks about his ultimate conversion. Like, to kind of, let me see here. If you take a look at page 145, this is a good place to start. 145. The last chapter, Augustine talks about his intellectual conversion, right? So we're moving now. How do you live the good life? The study of ethics, right? Is it an intellectual endeavor, or is it an endeavor of the heart, right? That's kind of where we're going now. Augustine came to all these intellectual conclusions in the last chapter that the Catholic faith he finds is right. God can't be bound with a material body, all this stuff. But there's something that still holds him back. And that's this concupiscence. It's this cravings of the flesh, all this stuff. This passage kind of sums up the state of a lot of people, I would say, and not just Augustine. You take a look, it says passage 17. But at that moment, the more ardent my affection for those young men of whom I was hearing, who for the soul's health had given themselves wholly to you for healing, the more was the detestation and hatred I felt for myself in comparison with them. Many years of my life had passed by, about 12, since in my 19th year I had read Cicero's Hortensius and had been stirred to a zeal for wisdom. But although I came to despise earthly success, I put off giving time to the quest for wisdom. For it is not the discovery, but the mere search for wisdom which should be preferred even to the discovery of treasures and the ruling over nations and the physical delights available to me at a nod. But I was an unhappy young man, wretched as at the beginning of my adolescence, when I prayed you for chastity and said, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. I was afraid you might hear my prayer quickly and that you might too rapidly heal me of the disease of lust, which I preferred to satisfy rather than suppress. I had gone along evil ways with a sacrilegious superstition, not indeed because I felt sure of its truth, but because I preferred it to the alternative, which I did not investigate in a devout spirit, but posed in an attitude of hostility. That line, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. This is the root of all of it for Augustine. This is that line can sum up this whole book, even, right? Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. He's convinced intellectually that in his belief in God, he's convinced intellectually that he knows that he's doing what he is doing is wrong with all of his mistresses and stuff. However, his concupiscence is still taking over here, right? He knows it's wrong. He wants to just enjoy it one more day, though, right? Just one more day. I'll enjoy my mistress, right? Another day. It's what you guys deal with when you're binge watching TV, right? After like 3 hours Netflix will be like, "Yo, you still there?" Right? You click the button. Right? One more episode. Right? One more episode. Um, yeah, I used to play the game Civilization on PC, and there was a joke with that game. One more turn, right? Like you would play it, and like you would lose. It's like 6 hours would go by, and you wouldn't even know it. One more turn. Um, this is exactly what he's talking about here, right? We know we're doing wrong. It's concupiscence, right? We know we're doing wrong, but we like to roll in it. We're like pigs, right? We're like pigs rolling in the sty, right? We can't help it. We just roll in it, even though we know up here it's wrong. We still do it. Why? Because something hasn't happened in here yet to do it. This is kind of the whole heart of Augustine's argument. Okay, and Aristotle, from previously in the semester when we studied Nicomachean ethics, the whole point of Aristotle's book was you can do it. You can achieve virtue. You can cultivate it by good habit. You can practice this by doing it. And eventually, when you do it long enough, it'll become ingrained in a habit, and you will be a better person as a result. Augustine here is saying no. Something deeper and more profound has to happen. You can develop these habits, but you'll never fully be happy until something else happens. Right? Of course, that something else is accepting God's grace, as we will see in the next chapter. But grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. That's the whole crux of what he is discussing. What do you guys think of this idea? Do you feel like just the first day we talked about this book, you discussed your confessions, right, of your little sins? I have another one I can confess that I could tell you about. I just did this the other day. Okay, yeah, they're putting up the other day in the elevator. They put up political signs in the elevator. So they put up a Shelley Moore Capito sign in the elevator. So I got my little pen and put an R before the A. Okay, so now if you go into the elevator at Bluefield State, it'll say Shelley Moore Crapito. So yeah, that was me. Okay, so yeah, I just couldn't help myself. I knew it was wrong, but I still did it. Okay, so this is human nature, right? We know it's wrong. We know it here. We still do it. Think he's right? Is this the source of spiritual problems? Do you think the source of unhappiness and depression, things like this? Thoughts. I'll try to ground you a little here. This is a big question. I'll try to ground you a little. This also has the answer that you give kind of has other implications as well. Part of the whole ingredient of her salvation and going to heaven in Christianity is, of course, you have to have faith, right? Faith in Christ as your Redeemer. But I guess the question of works comes up too, right? Like, do you need to do good things in order to go on? What if you live the worst life, but on your deathbed, right, you get converted? Well, Augustine certainly didn't live a good life for most of his life, and he converted. But can you have a truly guess what I'm pointing out here is, can you have a truly complete faith and still kind of live immersed within a cycle of sin and concupiscence, right? I would say probably not, right? You have. I'm the pro. If you're Protestant, you might completely disagree with me on this, right? But if you have faith, you also have to do works, right? You have to walk the walk, and talk the talk. You can't be a hypocrite, right? Augustine admits in here that he was a hypocrite, because we're all hypocrites in some respect, right? But he's saying here it takes both. You have, in order to be good, you have to have faith, but the good, you can't have faith and do evil, right? That's kind of what he's saying here. Yeah, Jordan, I'll let you break the ice. You're always the icebreaker here. Where's your thinking at? I'm not hearing you, Jordan. I don't know if that's a me problem or. There you are. I think your sound's working now. Still, well, it worked for a brief second. Now it's not again. I'll come back to you, Jordan. Okay, until you figure it out. Let's just go round table. I see you up. I see you up there, Allison. You want to kick us off?
Yeah. So my personal belief is that you're not saved by works, but that a true understanding and acceptance of grace is going to produce works.
Right.
But I don't think that's what you're saved by.
Now, nobody, even the Augustine and the Catholics, won't say that you're saved by works, right? Faith is an important ingredient. But I guess the key here is the works. You can't have true faith without works. That's kind of what.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I said, is that I think if you truly do have faith, then works will be produced.
Right. Yeah, this is something that Catholics and Protestants go hard about. And I think we all agree, but we just put different words and terms on it. Right. But you can't have works. You can't. Yeah, you're exactly right. You can't be saved just by works. But if you say you're saved and you do awful works, are you really saved? Right? I guess that's the question.
I think that if you could be saved by works, then Jesus' crucifixion would not have purpose. There's no reason for Jesus to be crucified to save you if you could do it on your own. So that for me makes that, my ability to work my way to heaven impossible. And then the other thing, as far as, no, I don't think you're mandated. Like, I'm saved today. There's not a long list of mandates that I have to do today to be saved. But at the same time, you're known by the fruits that you bear. So if I'm saved and I'm watering my tree, I'm going to be bearing good fruits. And that fruit is going to go into your actual work and putting your beliefs, your faith, your mind beliefs into action.
Right. Yeah, well said, Mandy. You plant this. It's like the parable of the fig tree, right? You plant the seed. you guys are having good stuff to say, but the heart of the matter is, you can't be truly saved by grace and still do awful stuff, right? That's kind of where Augustine's going. Remember, it is Catholics kind of argue that your salvation is something that you can lose, right? If you go off, if you say that you're saved, but then you go off and do all these vile things, right? And then you don't ask for forgiveness. That's something you can go into a state of mortal sin, and then if you die without that being confessed, that's bad, right? The more Protestant understanding of it is grace is something that saves you once and forever, right? Once and forever. It's almost like we're arguing in circles here, because if you argue that it's once and forever, then the argument will be, if you truly are saved, you won't do awful things. It's almost like we're arguing in a big circle here. That's the whole heart of it. Augustine, at least, to kind of ground us back in the text, he doesn't think that he truly had a conversion. Even though he converted intellectually, he didn't feel like he had a true conversion, because something didn't happen in here, right? Something didn't happen in here. So, and you can come to these determinations intellectually, but until something happens in there, until the grace of God moves you, right, you won't truly change. That's kind of where he's going. Let's take a look at the actual conversion passage. I told you guys this is one of the most famous, I wouldn't even say medieval literature. This is one of the most famous passages in literature anywhere. Those of you who might have taken World Lit with me, this passage is in the Norton Anthology. Like, whenever they talk about Augustine's Confessions, they usually have this passage. The whole book's been building up to this. Let's see. The end of book 8. Let's see. Let's just take a look at page 152. 152. This is where it happens. We'll read this carefully. So let's start with section 12 on page 152, Roman numeral 12. From a hidden depth, a profound self-examination had dredged up a heap of all my misery and set it in the sight of my heart. That precipitated a vast storm bearing a massive downpour of tears. To pour it all out with the accompanying groans, I got up from beside Alpius. Solitude seemed to me more appropriate for the business of weeping. I moved further away to ensure that even his presence put no inhibition upon me. He sensed that this was my condition at that moment. I think I may have said something which made it clear that the sound of my voice was already choking with tears. So I stood up while in profound astonishment he remained where we were sitting. I threw myself down somewhere under a certain fig tree and let my tears flow freely. Rivers streamed from my eyes, a sacrifice acceptable to you. And though not in these words, yet in this sense, I repeatedly said to you, how long, O Lord, how long, Lord, will you be angry to the uttermost? Do not be mindful of our old iniquities. For I felt my past to have a grip on me. It uttered wretched cries. How long is it to be? Tomorrow, tomorrow. Why not now? Why not an end to my impure life in this very hour? So, Augustine here, just before we move on, Augustine here is pretty much describing this ultimate despair he's finally got into, right? He's talking about, he's almost at the point of being suicidal, right? This is how deep and dark his spiritual despair got. But if you take a look at the next part, as I was saying this and weeping in the bitter agony of my heart, suddenly I heard a voice from the nearby house chanting as if it might be a boy or a girl, I do not know which, saying and repeating over and over again, "Pick up and read, pick up and read." At once my countenance changed, and I began to think intently whether there might be some sort of children's game in which such a chant is used. But I could not remember having heard of one. Checked the flood of tears and stood up. I interpreted it solely as a divine command to me to open the book and read the first chapter I might find. I had heard how Antony happened to be present at the gospel reading, took it as an admonition addressed to himself when the words were read, "Go, sell all you have, and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." By such an inspired utterance, he was immediately converted to you. So I hurried back to the place where Alpius was sitting. There I had put down the book of the apostle when I got up. I seized it, opened it, and in silence read the first passage on which my eyes lit. Not in riots and drunken parties, not in eroticism and indecencies, not in strife and rivalry, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh and its lusts. I neither wished nor needed to read further. At once, with the last words of this sentence, it was as if a light of relief from all anxiety flooded into my heart. All the shadows of doubt were dispelled. So it almost feels like Augustine here pretty much describes it's almost like God himself speaks to him here, right? He hears this message, go and read, go and read. It's kind of funny because Catholics like to gripe about this, that people will just open up a Bible and read a passage and then take it out of context. Okay. That's exactly what Augustine does here. He opens up his scripture and reads a passage, perhaps takes it out of context. But he takes that as almost like this is God himself speaking to him, right? And all this stuff that he's talking about, these lusts, this struggle with lust, forgive me or help me overcome this, but not yet, right? All this stuff he's struggling with, it's almost like God saying, here's the verse you need, right? Here's the verse you need. At that moment, something happens in here. And he's truly changed and converted. What do you guys think of this? What do you guys think of this passage? It's an intensely personal passage. Have you guys even heard of other stories kind of like that? Like somebody might discover their faith in such a way like that. It's almost like the person's being spoken to. I don't know. What do you guys think? Just open up the Bible, see a random passage, get faith, right? That's kind of what Augustine does. Yeah, it seems it's one of those things you can explain it as a coincidence, maybe. It's just one of those things, like he's so embroiled in his emotions. That particular verse spoke to him in that moment. I can see where he would feel that that's a divine voice speaking to him, right, through the scripture. I don't know if you guys have ever felt such a stirring that maybe the universe or God is telling you to do something, right? But that's kind of what he felt there. God's like, all right, bro, I've been watching you up here. I know what you're dealing with. Here's the little bit nugget you need. It's kind of where it's all going. I don't know. Nobody has a thought here, and you haven't heard of a similar story, or maybe have a personal anecdote yourself along these lines. Well, I won't belabor the point then. Okay, but needless to say, everything changes for him in this moment. In the ninth book, he talks about the ninth book is probably where the whole thing comes full circle, because finally, at this point in the ninth book, he decides to go through with the sacrament of baptism. Right. So remember, baptism is the initiation into the Christian faith. Within Catholic doctrine, baptism is an essential part of the process. Okay, you might ask yourself the question, if it's an essential part of the process, you might ask yourself the question, what about somebody who dies before they can before they can actually get the baptism? Right? Let's say you're planning to get baptism, you're going to get baptized on Easter or whatever, but then the day before you get into a car wreck and die, right? Would that suggest that you didn't get the baptism yet, so you're going to go to hell? No. Okay. They do distinguish, like if something like that would happen, you had the desire in your heart for it. Practical reasons it didn't happen yet. Nobody's going to say you're going to go to hell, right, just because of something like that. But he does go through with it. Earlier in the book, right, if you remember, when he was a child, they decided not to baptize him. But now he kind of goes through. It's a powerful moment for him. After all the stuff, he decides to finally go through with it. And he also talks a lot about his mother in this last part. His mother, throughout the whole book, she's always praying for him in the background, right? She is throughout the whole thing. She is a devout Christian herself, and the whole time she's praying for him. Finally, her prayers are answered, right? Because her son finally got his head out of his ass. But it's almost at this point that she passes, right? It's one of the interesting things about it. Augustine also characterizes her in a way that is very human. Right? Like, you might think to yourself, oh, she's this dutiful Christian lady. She's perfect in every way. He does not characterize her like that in this last book. He pretty much says in the last book that his mother was an alcoholic. His mother suffered from the addiction of alcohol in the last book. Like, oh, my mother is a saint, but she was a drunk. Like, that's kind of what he was. You better not give her wine, or she'll go nuts. Right? That's kind of what he's doing here in this last book. He probably drove her to drink, but yeah, he goes a lot but he also goes into, like, why did she develop the addiction, right? Because, well, her husband physically abused her and all of this stuff. She suffered this sorrow from dealing with him. So better not give her one. If you gave her one too many, she can't help herself, right? But that seems to be her biggest flaw. She can't cut it off at 2 or 3, right? She's the type of person you better cut it off at 0, right? No, none for Saint Monica, okay? I'm looking at page 167. This is where he talks about it. A weakness for wine gradually got a grip upon her. By custom, her parents used to send her, a sober girl, to fetch wine from the cask. She would plunge the cup through the aperture at the top. Before she poured the wine into a jug, she used to take a tiny sip with the tip of her lips. She could not take more as she disliked the taste. What led her to do this was not an appetite for liquor, but the surplus high spirits of a young person, which can overflow in playful impulses, and which in children and adults ordinarily try to suppress. Accordingly to that sip of wine, she added more sips every day, until she had fallen into the habit of gulping down full cups of wine. Where then was the wise old woman in her vehement prohibition? She could have had no strength against the secret malady unless your healing care, Lord, were watching over us. Mother and father and nurses are there, not there, you are present. He pretty much says, she had a weakness for it, but it would have probably got worse, right, if it wasn't for her faith. Her faith and the grace is what cultivates good habits and stopped her from kind of fully subsuming herself in that addiction. So therein lies the whole book, right? The ingredient, the whole ingredient. You have to, all these habits and stuff that Aristotle talked about, it's all well and good. And you certainly should do them. Temperance, generosity, courage, all these things that we talked about earlier in the semester. But you can't fully perfect them until you get the grace of God. That's the whole thesis of the entire book. And that is the key to happiness, like Augustine argues, right? Finding God, and everything else will fall into place from there. Let's just kind of reflect on the whole book, okay? I don't know if any of you guys want to share or not, but I don't know. Are any of you guys in here not particularly religious, or maybe an atheist or agnostic or something like that? If so, I would be especially interested to hear what is your impression of the book in that case? Like, I don't know if anybody has anything to share in that respect.
I'm not religious, but it was very interesting just to hear him talk about like his friendship with certain people. Excuse me, his mom and his dad. Like, to me, that was very interesting.
Right. So to dive a little deeper there, Emily, you said you're not religious. What do you think about this whole argument? Like, you need his whole argument, you can't do it yourself, you need God.
That's a good question. Maybe some people might say yes, some people might say no. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. Something to think about.
Right? I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to what Emily just said. Emily kind of feels indifferent. Yeah, I would be interested to teach this class, to teach this book to a group of people who are very hostile towards religion, right? Just to see what they would, what things that they would say about it. We can kind of turn this around too and talk about those of you who do have faith, right? Maybe you're a Christian of some sorts, right? Turning around and finishing this, right? Do you, in this case, right? Do you feel like Augustine's right in this whole enterprise that he has talked about? Do you feel, if you're a person of faith yourself, right? Do you feel like your faith has been strengthened by reading the book? That's another question. I know I'm going to call on you, Allison. We've had these discussions before, right? What's your final thoughts on Augustine to kind of put a cap on it?
There was some stuff that I agreed with, but then there was some that I couldn't. I'm not thinking of what specifically right now. It's not coming to my head, but I remember there was one part that I was like, I don't really, but like, I do agree with the fact I couldn't be the person that I am without Jesus.
Right.
So I agree on that aspect.
Right. You feel like you can't do it yourself, right? You need the grace.
I do.
Did you ever figure your mic out there, Jordan? There you go. Yep.
Okay. So this is a hard book for me to work through.
Mhm.
I mean, I was raised Baptist.
Yep.
I don't really know if I'm fully Baptist anymore. I don't know what Christian I'm going to be. I just know that I'm going to be a Christian something.
Mhm.
And I agree with a lot of Augustine's points. I'm kind of trying to like reel myself back from some of the parts of the book that we just read, because his conversion experience is very like emotionally moving. I think that was probably one of the things that like stuck out to me about it, like in terms of my own life, is that like I was growing up Baptist. I like said the sinner's prayer and went through, all that kind of stuff back when I was like 7 years old, and had basically every adult in my life confirm this idea that I was already saved by default because I had said that prayer when I was 7. And I don't think I actually fully understood, and I still don't think I fully understand, but I think I'm much closer now as an adult than I ever was as a 7-year-old. And I kind of come back to, when I think of like, I kind of think of salvation as something that like you have to cooperate with, something you have to live into. What exactly that means in technical terms, I don't know, but I think of Augustine and his emphasis on works. Some of it might be semantics, like,
Mhm.
because if you're, I've heard it said a dozen times, if you're really saved, then you're going to want to do good works. But I also think it's kind of something, it could be like I think with Augustine, it seems like for him, it was like a lifelong process that, he kind of he started out from a place of unbelief, and even as he understood it, and even as he intellectualized it, he still wasn't fully there yet. He had to keep going and keep, growing in faith. And I kind of think of it in like that sense of, it's almost like, to a degree, a process. Like, you can't get it all, at first, just because you believe initially. But I'm still exploring it. So
Jordan, I think the Christian walk, sorry to interrupt you, but you're absolutely right as far as it's a process. But I think if you look at a Christian walk like a person, you're born as an infant, you can't talk, you can't roll over, you can't even sit up. It's a process, and you grow to learn. You learn to talk, you learn to communicate, you learn intimacy, you learn all of those things as a small child. And I think your Christian walk is the same. You may start as a baby, but by the time it's over, you can run.
yeah, like, I agree with that. I mean, when you think of it like that, I mean, maybe when I was 7, I was just beginning my walk. And maybe I'm just further along. Maybe I'm learning to run now. I'm not very good at running, I don't think. I might be stumbling a bit.
Nobody's good at running. Nobody's good at running. That's the purpose in life. It's a process.
Yeah. It's a complicated book. There's a lot to work through. So,
Well, I'm glad that I taught it in Jordan, because it's invited all these questions within yourself, which is what a class like this should do, I think. So I'm glad that it stirred some thoughts and feelings. The whole issue of, is it faith a process, or is it something you can just do once? My thought on that. I certainly believe it's a process, but depends where you fall in your own belief on that one. Yeah, I'll just kind of share this with you guys. Why not? My story is probably very similar to Jordan's. I grew up in a Baptist household, right? I too did that, but when I got to my adult life, especially my 20s, I went crazy. Right? I was kind of like Augustine. And the whole time I was miserable. So when I read this book, I'm very moved by it, because I see a lot of myself in Augustine. And like him, I kind of felt like he talks about that moment of hearing open the book and read. I had a moment like that too. Just something inside me just said, you need to get back into it, right? You need to get back into it. You need to try something new, but you need to, since you know what you did before wasn't for you, but you need to get back into it. I did, and the rest is history. So yeah, I personally relate to the book because I see a lot of myself in Augustine. So Hannah, I saw where you got your camera on over there. You got some thoughts? You're not hiding from me.
I'm actually at my grandma's right now, so I help take care of her. So I've kind of been paying attention and all over the place. But I am, I'm a born again Christian, and I don't think there's any wrong way to believe in God. There's no wrong way to find Him. We're all on our own separate path as a Christian. But I also believe, once you've accepted Jesus as your Savior, and once you've brought Him into your heart, and you're trying to live a better life, He gives you the tools to make the right decisions. You know what I mean? And whether you do them or not is up to you. But He's going to meet you where you are and give you the tools you need to make the right decision in your life. So that's all I got.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it too. The tool for Augustine in this case was that Bible verse, right? So you could make the case Augustine accepted the faith early in his life, right? And he had the tool within his soul to eventually do right. Certainly a valid way of reading it. I think you can go both ways. I like your reading of it, Hannah. Yeah, either way we go, this is Augustine here pretty much sums up Christian thought when it comes to ethics in a nutshell. And as we close out the class, Christianities, we're going to keep bringing it up, because especially when we start getting into stuff like medical ethics, lots of times the Christian ethical view influences a certain perspective on certain issues. Like, for instance, we were talking about something like euthanasia. Well, the Christian view is life is always precious, right? Human beings always have dignity. Augustine talks about that in the book. Therefore, it's wrong, right? Other ethical systems have different things to say. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be turning our attention to these other ethical systems. But what we've been spending the last 2 weeks discussing will certainly influence how we look at practical issues when we start getting to more practical ethics in the coming weeks. But the Christian approach to ethics is always there, especially when it comes to a lot of hot topics that we have today. As we get close to the end, we're going to talk about several hot topics. Okay, we're going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about IVF. We're going to talk about euthanasia, brain death. Like, when do you let a patient go? Right? Like, especially if they're on a ventilator or something, when do you let them go? The debates about that. So this is one system. We're going to be discussing the next few systems. Then in the end, we're going to apply all those systems together. So hopefully the structure of the course will especially start to come together over the next few weeks. You have this whole foundation, the good life, Aristotle, the Greek tradition, now the Christian tradition. Now you're going to go into the modern traditions. Okay. At the end, we're going to put them all together and see how it all works out. All right. So next time, I won't make you read anything next time. You had to read a lot today. I can just kind of come in and teach you Islam cold turkey without you having necessarily needing to read anything. So I will update our Moodle shell soon to account for the reading for next Wednesday. But for now, for Monday, you guys have a free day. It's kind of class. We'll talk Islam. Okay. An important thing to talk about, considering how vilified it's getting in our world again by certain people. So we will come and discuss that next time. So have a good weekend, everybody.
You too. Have a good day, everybody.
You, Mandy.